Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Julia Barbosa Landois, and I am the grant writer and fiscal sponsorship manager for Fresh Arts. Fresh Arts is an arts service organization here in Houston that empowers Houston artists through programs that build knowledge, amplify local resources, and connect communities. Fresh Arts accomplishes this mission through professional development and artist-centered public programming, including commissioning local artists to do public art projects and performances here in Houston. Let's see. We're offering this workshop in partnership with BANF, and I want to very quickly introduce our guest, Erin McClarty. She's a writer, business owner, creative, and attorney by trade who helps clients all over the nation translate their ideas into life-changing projects, programs, and initiatives. She works with businesses, charities, institutions, and movement leaders to form structures, documents, and business models that reflect their values, dreams, purpose, and mission. Thank you so much, Erin, for hosting this workshop, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, folks, for joining, especially those in Houston after what felt like weeks of rain. I know it's nice weather out, so we'll get you out on time so you can enjoy a little bit of the sun. As you mentioned, I'm a social impact architect, fundamentally working with people and institutions and organizations, movement leaders in connecting the dots between the worlds that they want to live in and the visions they have of those worlds and their implementation of that. So translating that into projects and programs, initiatives, and different infrastructures is what that's all about. I am an attorney by training. Don't hold that against me. But I use that as an interdisciplinary way of doing some of this other work. So there's a little bit of legal, a little bit of design, a little bit of strategy is my jam. We talked a little bit already about Fresh Arts and all the amazing work that they're doing for artists across the creative ecosystem in Houston. And so really give thanks for hosting this and asking me to participate. And want to get into our attention. So one, I'm going to be looking at a weird place on my screen. So I have notes up. I get chatty and I get very excited about this topic. So if I don't have notes up, I will absolutely go over time. So if you see me looking every which way, that's why. This talk today is in connection to a specific event, as was mentioned. It's the Houston Cultural Treasures Accelerator, of which an application is open for now, that is being powered by the BIPOC Arts Network Fund. I'll talk a little bit about them toward the end. If you're not hooked up to the BIPOC Art Network Fund, you should be. Doing some amazing work around resourcing BIPOC-led and centered organizations throughout Houston, and working with a variety of organizations through grant making, technical assistance, cohorts, learning experiences, et cetera. And so big shout out to them. Even though this workshop is tied to the accelerator, it is not specific to the accelerator, if that makes sense. So this really applies to anyone that's interested in identifying ways of approaching the visions that they have for the work that they do in the worlds that they're building, and making sure that the strategies and the goals that they develop actually align with their mission and their vision. Because one of the things I'll talk about that often happens is people treat strategy and goals as completely disconnected from. And what that results in is strategies and goals that aren't necessarily in alignment with the worlds that they're wanting to build. And we'll talk about that in a sec. It was really important to us, both Fresh Arts and myself, that this applied not just to 501c3s. We love all our organizations and collaboratives. So collectives, collaboratives, informal groups. If you and the homies are doing something in terms of an initiative, this applies to you. So it's not just 501c3 specific. And if I slip up and say something that sounds like it's 501c3 specific, it's just because of the time, but it's not because this is specific to them. And speaking of time, I absolutely believe that time is a construct. It is not necessarily linear, all the things, and we only have 60 minutes. So this is going to be an overview. And I will focus on a very specific aspect of world building. I love talking about how organizations and artists and creatives can and do use their mediums and disciplines and practices to build the worlds that we hope to live in. This will not focus so much on that specifically, even though I do talk about that in other ways. It will focus on an aspect of world building, which again is the strategies that you develop for how you actually build these worlds. I love starting out time by being really clear about what I'm saying. Oh, and also before I forget, I will not necessarily be monitoring the chat because I have way too much going on my computer, but if you all can let me know that if you see something in the chat or something can be dinged or blinked, that would be helpful, or just kind of wave. If any questions come up, do please ask questions. And if it's something that I'll get to or will make sense toward the end, of which I'll also have time for questions, then we can do that. And of course, you can ask me questions at another time. Cool. So in terms of what I mean when I say strategy, I'm talking about approaches. What is the approach to carrying out a goal and the mission and building the world that you want to see? Fundamentally, I say best guess approaches because we are all building worlds that we've never lived in before. And if we are building worlds that we've never lived in before, we are necessarily deploying strategies that we've never deployed before, right? And so one of the things that I see happen with strategy is people treat it as definitive, and they treat it very rigidly. This is the strategy. Once we set it, this is it. And that's not, it can't be true, right? Strategy needs to be emergent to the times and the circumstances and the environment. It needs to be adaptive to what's happening in the times and environment. And what I tell those specifically who are cultural workers, artists, creatives, is really think about your creative process. Your creative process is strategies, right? And it's something that changes and shifts depending on where you are or what you're doing or how you want to do it. And so that's how I want us to be thinking about strategy as a best guess, something that we're testing. And when we carry out our goals and move towards our vision through our mission. And then goals, I'm saying aspirational actions you plan to implement by executing on strategy. So there's the things that you plan to do, execute on to get to the strategy, execute on your strategy. These are my definitions in this very specific moment. I guarantee you they will change in a month or 2 months' time. So don't hold me to them, but in this specific discussion, that's what I mean. This is what I mean when I say them. And I'm not necessarily saying these are the best. These are what I came up with for how I do this work. You may have different definitions, or you may see different definitions, and that's totally fine. But at least you'll know what I mean when I say them. In our time today, I like to start by talking about what I hope for us to get curious about and unlearn. So one thing that I hope that we can get curious about and possibly unlearn is that typically when we do these goal setting workshops, they center entirely on what you do. So the thing that you are doing. And for a number of reasons, because we're focused on the thing, the what, they quickly turn to solutions and doing, and actually really skip what I think of when I think of strategy. So when I say doing, if you are a dance company, for example, people will talk about, oh, we implement classes to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And education may be a strategy, but they will treat classes in and of itself as a strategy, and again, be rigid about that. And it's something that needs to be a little bit more nuanced. So I don't necessarily want to focus on what you do. I want to also talk about why and how you do what you do. And we'll talk about that in a bit. The other thing is that the focus of funders and funding institutions is usually short-term, and they're usually outputs, not even outcomes. And many of you have probably already been in that conversation around outputs and outcomes. And the reason I bring this up is because it translates into how an organization develops its goals. It's based on these very short-term focused conversations with funders and funding institutions. When we are focused on the short term, the quick win, oftentimes, that limits our imagination in terms of the strategies we deploy and the things that we do. And the way that it manifests is you'll see organizations who develop strategies that are very linear, that tend to touch on the symptoms of the things that they want to change, and they veer away from the more nuanced, the long-term, the messy, the root, the systemic challenges that come up, because those are the things that are a little bit hard, or a lot of it harder and intractable. And so I bring this up because when you're developing strategies and goals, either for the accelerator application or just in the own initiatives and works that you're doing, be paying attention for whether you are focused on very linear, very surface, quick wins, the low-hanging fruit, and look and see whether you're actually touching on the more intractable, the more messy aspects of the work that you're doing. It's not good or bad. It's just a reality in the philanthropic spaces that many of us are navigating. One thing I want to be super clear on is that often these spaces act as if strategy is something new, that we are teaching, we being whoever the instructor or person speaking, are teaching someone else. But I want to be abundantly clear that everyone, specifically BIPOC-led and BIPOC-centered organizations, have been on this tip for forever, right? Because it's been a matter of survival. You do strategy now. You do world building now. Whether or not you're building the worlds you want to live in, that's a different conversation, but you do strategy now. So I never want to approach this conversation as if you don't do something and I am teaching you something you don't know. You do know this. Strategy is how you find joy in the midst of everything that's happening in your organizations and how your organizations does its work. Strategy is navigating the work that you're doing when you're likely under-resourced, because I'm pretty sure most of you who are attending and will see this video feel as if you're under-resourced. And the way that you are doing the work, your capacity to do the work, is strategy. So I am not teaching you anything new. What I do hope to do is approach strategy as something that shifts away from the purely defensive and responsive. This is especially the case for BIPOC-led and BIPOC-centered, because there's so much chaos and crisis that's manufactured by very specific systems. So much of our strategy is spent responding. It's responding to what exists, which means we tend to reinforce what exists and not necessarily build what we hope to see exist, right? And it's not that these are necessarily oppositional to one another, but it is, think about what it means to have all your strategy focus on defending and responding to what is, and then what it would mean to have strategy or to include strategy that actually builds towards what you believe needs to exist, and those things melding together. So that's what I hope to do, is to resource and support the ability to not only continue the strategy that supports those who are undergoing everything that's happening right now, but also start to, if you're not already, integrate strategy that works towards the worlds that you're actually wanting to build. Okay, see that, I saw a hand up. All right. So in the time that we are together, be thinking about where you land with strategy. When doing this work, do you prioritize honesty? Do you prioritize vulnerability and conscious raising? Are there barriers, internal barriers, or could be external barriers to how you develop your strategy? Because one of the things I like to tell clients is, it's one thing to go and saying, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And then it's another to already be thinking ahead of potential barriers that could formulate against what you're trying to do, and be already strategizing for how you do your strategy, right? And so are there structures, infrastructures, knowledges, gatekeepers? You know, are there things that can serve as barriers? And are you already thinking about how you'll navigate those things when you talk about developing strategy? Because again, strategy is not in a vacuum, right? It's in the moment that we're in the work that you're doing. And then if you're doing this as a group, be thinking honesty about how you approach this work. What are the environments you operate in when you're doing this work? And what is your organization or your collaborative or your collective's culture? Something else that I'll mention at the end, but I want to mention now, is that strategy is treated as capacity building in some of these other conversations, best practices, as if what works for one should work for all. Not the case, again, specifically for BIPOC-led and BIPOC-centered. And so strategy should be something reflective of your culture, your histories, your lineage, your lived experience, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, your community's desires. It should be acculturated and curated for who you're working with and why you're doing the work, and the people you're doing the work alongside, right? And it's not necessarily something to be plucked from other people's strategic documents and then implemented into this Frankenstein document. So this goes back to, again, I never want this to be presented as if I'm teaching something that you don't know. What I hope is we can think about how to make sure that your strategy is truly reflective of you and the worlds that you want to live in, is the goal. Relearning. So what I hope we relearn in this time is a couple different things. And I'll spend the rest of the time talking about what I hope for us to relearn. And then we'll go through an exercise framework and then an exercise. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can be working through them. So one thing when you're developing strategy, or just in general, that I really do hope you get out of this time together and that you live into, is thinking more expansively about who you are, and by virtue, thinking more expansively about the strategies you deploy and the goals you put together. So one of the things that we know about BIPOC-led and BIPOC-centered initiatives is that they don't just focus on the thing. So going back to my example of a dance company, dance is not just about dancing. It's belonging, it's knowledge transfer, it's preservation, it's resistance, it's education, it's advocacy, it's community building, it's giving layers, right? It's more than just dancing. The same is true for visual art. The same is true for music, especially for music. It's multifaceted. And so we need to honor that in our strategies, and we need to honor that as a strategy of itself. Because oftentimes these are invisible things that organizations are doing, but they're not paying attention to, is the fact that serving as a dance company that preserves, that does knowledge transfer, that does community building. The community building is a strategy, right? And so when you're submitting grant applications, when you're submitting maybe an accelerator application, when you're talking about your work to your communities, to funders, to other institutions, it's important to be talking about the work holistically. And to that same end, not only is it that dance is not just dance, but we also know that BIPOC-led and centered organizations don't get to just focus on the thing that they do. So if you're a dance company, you're not just focusing on being a dance company, particularly if you're doing, let's say, an after-school program, and particularly in certain communities. You are doing dance, you're probably feeding young adults, you're probably mentoring, you're probably navigating mental health challenges, and you may even be mediating familial or community conflicts. That's not just a dance company, right? So don't ignore any of this, because it's an integral part of your world building. And what is important is that so many of these organizations that do these things, who do after school and say, all right, we're not just doing the dance, we're going to make sure you're fed, we're going to make sure your family is integrated, we're going to make sure we're doing education, we're going to make sure that we're doing inclusive work. That is, it's acknowledging that we're multifaceted beings and we have multifaceted needs. And again, it's something that organizations, specifically BIPOC-led and centered, tend to ignore when they talk about their work and they talk about their strategies. So they'll focus on the dance programs or the after-school program, but they won't acknowledge all the resources and time and expenses going into feeding and nurturing and cultivating and supporting and mediating, when all of these, again, are integral strategies to getting towards the worlds that they want to live. And it's also resistance against the atomization of this work, because it's very specific systems that say dance is just dance. We're not doing this, or we're not thinking about these other things. We're just talking about dance. When we know it's never just about dance. Dance is never just about dance. Dance has always been inclusive and part of other aspects of our culture and our lineage, right? In terms of bringing community together, or navigating a conflict, or emoting something within our bodies. And so all that to say, don't ignore this, and all that to really say that when you're talking about yourself and you're talking about your work and strategies, you're not just a dance company, right? Not just a dance company. You are a preservationist. You are a researcher. You are an evaluator. You are a community builder. Own that. Own that and have strategies around that. Include strategies around that in strategic documents and plans that you put together. I cannot stress this enough, because every time I do these workshops and I'm talking again to BIPOC-led and BIPOC centered, which I'm focusing on because of BANF in the accelerator application, by the way. But when I'm talking to these organizations, half of what they do, they're not talking about, because for them, it's just second nature. Of course, they're going to feed the babies. Of course, they're going to be mediating this conflict of this family that they've been working with for 15 years. Of course, they're going to do this. And it's like, okay, of course, but that's a strategy that deserves to be funded. It deserves to be resourced. It deserves to be connected to, and it deserves to be acknowledged. So I know I spent a lot of time on that. I hope the underlying italics explanation point I'm hoping to put on it has been received. You're not just the dance company. You're not just a music or presenting company, right? And then two, I really hope that folks think big when they're thinking about their strategies, when they think about the work they're doing, particularly those who are going to be applying for the accelerator application. And when I say think big, I'm not talking about the decontextualized, atomized thinking about big just for the sake of thinking big, because that's just another form of competition, right? We want to be the first, we want to be the best, we want to be the newest. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about developing strategies and goals that are audacious, that are really rooted in vision, but are bold. When you think about the work that you're doing and the strategies that you're putting together for doing that work, are they bold? Right? And one way to think about this or to do this work is that when you start setting your strategies, or when you are setting strategies, when you are setting goals, taking a moment to look through them. So write them out, take a moment to look through them, and then always assume that there are ways to be more bold and more audacious and stretch them. Always. And we'll do a quick exercise toward the end where you'll be able to start plucking out strategies and thinking about what that looks like. And one of the things you can practice is what that looks like, right? Typically, again, for a number of reasons, because of the systems that we navigate, when I am working with most organizations, they're thinking very small in terms of their strategy. Not because they're small thinkers, but because they are big, audacious thinkers that are being squeezed into small ways of being by very specific spaces, people, etc. And it's just a matter of that memory, remembering what it looks like, specifically when you started an initiative or a project or program. Typically, there was very big thinking involved, and then over time, sometimes it can start to winnow and become linear, as I mentioned. And so always be thinking about, how can I be more audacious and more bold in what I'm putting together? It should make you a little bit nervous. If it doesn't make you nervous, it may not be audacious enough. We need a lot of audacity now. And then during our time here, what I want to make sure is that when we talk about strategy, we're not talking about a to-do list. So I won't get into strategic plans, even though that word makes me itch, strategic plan, but I won't be getting into those today. I do strategic frameworks, but I do want to bring them up because typically with a strategic plan, for those who are familiar, for those who aren't, it's a document that many organizations and initiatives, companies, businesses put together as a way of thinking about what strategy looks like over a period of time. 3-year strategic plan, 5-year strategic plan, 10-year strategic plan. Not sure how you plan over 10 years. That's a different conversation for a different day. But often the strategic plans are basically to-do lists, right? So you have something that's been called strategy. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's not. Then there's goals, and it's just people checking things off. I don't want us to be thinking about strategy as something to just check off. Again, strategy is a best guess way of testing, an approach for testing our belief about how to navigate something, whether it be education or working intergenerationally. And we'll talk about a little bit of that later. But I want us to think expansively around strategy. Strategy is not just a thing that we do to check it off the list. Lastly, whenever you do goal setting, as I was mentioning, always build in time to pause and reflect. Very rarely do people actually go back after they set the goals, sometimes because the process is so strenuous and stressful. Totally get it. But once you put your goals down, have a process, particularly as a group, to just pause and develop questions that really prompt you to prod and possibly redirect. So an example of these questions could be, how do these goals get to the worlds we want to see and build? And I bring this up because, again, what we find oftentimes is people developing goals that are totally disconnected from the worlds that they want to build. We all have seen examples of this, where folks have a very specific vision that we're like, all right, I'm on board with this. This makes sense to me. I'm excited about this. And then you see how they enact that vision. And you're like, wait a minute, girl, this is not aligning, right? It's because they were disconnected, or the way that they developed their goals was totally decontextualized from their vision and their mission. And so having these questions built into the process of already asking, wait a minute, we developed this goal. How does this goal get us to the worlds we want to build? Because if the goal doesn't get you to the worlds you want to build, then is it really a goal? Right? And so having those governors, or those ways, I don't like that word, having those ways to check and see if you're in alignment is really, really helpful. Other questions: is it clear from these goals why we do what we do? Is it clear from the goals why we do what we do, or what we do in addition to what we do? So this is going into those invisibles again, right? Is it clear from the goals that we're not just focused on dance, but we're focused on a holistic way of seeing movement, of seeing embodiment, of being in a collective embodiment, right? That's much more than just choreography. And so that's another question that you might ask. And then, are we focused purely on an output here? This goes back to how so many have been taught to treat strategy, which is just, we're going to have 15 classes. No, I mean, yeah, I guess, but no, we don't want to just stand and we want to have 15 classes. And if you look at a document that I'm going to share with you all, a Google Doc that really walks through tips that I give, and you'll get that link if you haven't already soon. That's one of the examples I have, is how can we go from we're going to implement 15 classes this quarter into some more expansive missions and values driven strategies. But yeah, so we want to think about, are we just focused on an output, getting out 15 classes? Or are we thinking about a larger transformation? Because if 15 classes is where we started, and then we build in some time to reflect and think about, what are we really trying to do here? We may discover, oh, actually education, actually collective education, actually putting people in their power to educate themselves is the strategy we want to deploy. Totally different than we want to implement 15 classes, right? So there's an example there. Goal setting framework, already behind. I told you I get excited about this stuff. I'm going to run through a goal setting framework for how I do this work. I'm not necessarily saying this is how you should be doing it. I find it helpful. And we won't go through this in the exercise today. I don't think we'll have time, but hopefully it'll help inform the work that you do as part of the worksheet that you'll get with this workshop. So in terms of goal setting and setting strategy, I start at the vision. Everything that I've mentioned relies on having a super clear vision. And what I find when I talk to organizations, initiatives, projects, collaboratives, collectives, is that they have a vision, they do not have a clear vision. I'm talking, what do you see? What exists? What doesn't exist? How does it smell, right? What do you taste? How does it feel? What all does it look like, right? Typically we have this vague sense of what we would like to exist in and what we want to create, but because again, there's so much going on and people are responding to different crises that are very prevalent right now, oftentimes people haven't taken the time to get really super visceral about the worlds that they're trying to build. And so I always suggest starting there. Get super clear about the worlds that you're trying to build, understanding that this is something that will change over time. And think about, how much time have you spent really getting intentional and thinking and writing out the worlds you want to build, not only for yourself, but also for the others that you're working with. Because one of the most fascinating part of the workshops that I run is oftentimes people think they're on the same page about the worlds they want to live in. And there are threads, but they're always fascinated when we take a moment to have them write out the worlds that they want to live in, the visions that they have, and they start sharing. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know you were interested in that. I didn't know you were trying to do that. So if you're working in a collective, a collaborative, you probably have had conversations, right? General conversations around the vision, what you hope to accomplish, what you want to create. But maybe take some time, if you haven't, to get really visceral with the group around what that looks like. And then in terms of mission, so we go from vision, I then go to mission, and I see the vision as the destination and the mission as the means of getting to the destination. So think vision is like, I hate to use this as an example, but it's what's coming to mind, Google Maps. And then mission is however vehicle, public transportation, that I'm using to get to my destination. So really, from your vision, be thinking about how will you discern the means by which you'll get there in a way that excites and enrolls. Let me not get in trouble. Oftentimes, when people come up with mission statements, they'll come up with something that they think is snazzy. We want to solve world hunger. That tells me nothing. That tells me nothing. Or they will come up with a mission statement that's super specific about the things that they want to do. We want to create classes that, we want to create classes for this community that teach arts and education. Okay, got it. And we're being expansive. One framework I love to use, even though it is capitalist in nature, I'm bringing that up in advance, is Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. The why, how, what. And I bring this up because mission statements, or your mission, purpose, however you want to define it, it's typically not what you do that will excite and enroll people. Art classes may not necessarily excite everyone. If you're wanting to create loving spaces of belonging that allow for creation and using imagination, now that's something that people can get excited about. And so what's interesting is typically when people develop their mission statements, their missions are very specific to what they do. That's because as a society, we have been taught to be focused on our outputs, the things that we do. However, what you do may be something that someone doesn't necessarily agree with. I see this often in collaboratives and collectives where there's a bit of conflict and tension. And what I find is it's the way of doing, or not necessarily way, it's what they're doing that maybe folks don't agree with. But when we get to the why, there's cohesion there. It's like, oh no, I'm trying to get to that world too. And so I say all this to say that when you're developing your mission, be thinking about and talk about why you're doing what you're doing and how, because this is the how that usually leads to transformation. And do talk about what, but don't focus so much on what. And the example here, just so you see it, they used Apple. Again, I just use this as a framework. So why Apple is doing what they're doing, believe in challenging the status quo. How is beautifully designed and easy to use products, and then what is we make computers. Then you go from mission to building out your strategy. So again, avoid strategy that is simply a to-do list or an operational plan. See strategy as guardrails and direction, but be flexible when you're developing strategy. And with strategy, it's not just about doing, but it's about being curious, that gathering information. Also, again, be thinking about strategy expansively. So not just the things specific to your discipline, your medium, what's specifically in your mission statement that you do. Going back to the dance company example, yes, you are a dance company and strategies that you deploy will be specific to enacting on being a dance company, but there are also things in terms of feeding, in terms of community building, in terms of mediating. Those are all strategies, and those are things that you should be very explicit about. So the framework essentially is I move from vision to mission and from mission to strategy. I bring this up because I find just working on strategy itself can be a bit tricky, and that's what gets us back to decontextualized strategy that doesn't align with the world we want to build. You don't have to do a whole multi-week process. It may just be sitting everyone down for an hour, longer than an hour, maybe 2.5 hours, doing a vision exercise, have everyone write out the vision that they envision, that they see, create perhaps a collective vision, then revisit your mission statement if you have a mission statement, or think about what the mission is specific to that vision, and then be developing strategy from that. I usually find that to be more helpful than trying to do it on the fly. Here's a QR code to the document that I created, because I know that I just kind of flew through that. It's a framework worksheet that goes through reflection prompts, a ton of tips that I use when I'm working with clients on strategy and goal setting. It also gives you a specific example that walks through pulling out strategies and goals from a mission and vision that I had created. So do check that out. Let's see, make sure. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do check that out. And then an exercise. Well, actually, let me pause. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box. And then if there aren't any questions, I'm tired, y'all. If there are no questions, then we'll move into a quick exercise where collectively we'll look at a mission and a vision and pull out some strategies and pull out some goals so that you can start to exercise those muscles in a group and ask any questions that you want to ask while we're together. So I'll just give it a second in case anybody has questions. If not, we'll move through the exercise. I don't see any, so I'll keep going, but if you do, please put them in there. So I wanted to do an exercise because I wanted us to do this together within a workshop setting. And for those of you that do a lot of different strategic initiatives and sessions within your collaboratives and groups, this should be super quick, and then you're more than welcome to ask me any questions that are more nuanced. For those who, because we all do strategy as a reminder, for those who do strategy but perhaps have not been as intentional in their strategy setting, then this will be an opportunity to do that now. And then any questions that come up in terms of what that process might look like for you or things that didn't feel comfortable, we can walk through them. So I knew that we wouldn't have to. Oh, yeah.
I see a raised hand for Tazeen. Do you want to take a question now, or do you?
I sure can.
Okay.
Is Tazeen able to ask? Can they come off of, or yeah, can they come off of mute or, oh, there we go.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sure
There we go.
can.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so thank you for letting me ask my question. It is something very simple, like I'm just trying to go, as you have just said, vision, mission, and strategy here. Oftentimes, you're just talking about one situation when you have a vision and you have a mission to take you, like carry you towards that vision, and a strategy. But
okay, keep going.
Yeah, my question is that most of the times, as a person of color and in a community where theater is not a very common thing, the problem is we only see support when we see result.
Yeah.
So the final part of the journey. So just like Noah, you build it and they will come.
Yeah.
They do, but once it is built already. So I would love for you to address this as well, because this is something pertaining to my community.
It's not just so. First of all, Tazeen, did we pronounce your name right too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Want to make sure. Thank you so much for that question. It is not just your community. You're absolutely right, and I'm sure there were some people that were nodding as you were talking. And I'm going to try to answer this in the way that I can online, and I'm happy to give you an answer offline. You're absolutely right in that there are many funders and institutions that they want to see the results first. And that goes back to what I was saying in terms of quick wins, that people develop strategies and goals that allow for low-hanging fruit, that they can get those quick wins. And once they get those quick wins and can be considered vetted or de-risked, then they can then go to a funder, and the funder is more likely to fund them. I will say, there is something to be said about geographics, right? So it's not necessarily true for the entire country and the funding landscape across the country that that's necessarily true. It is something for a number of reasons, again, that I'm happy to discuss offline, that you see is more prevalent in Texas specifically. It's not to say it doesn't happen elsewhere, because it does, but it is very specific to here. And the other thing that I want to balance is when we talk, there's a very delicate balance that I'm sure you're navigating, or harmony that you're navigating, of needing to be resourced and operating within the systems at resource, but also trying to navigate and empower or place in power the folks that you're working with and create transformation in those communities. So what I am sharing is definitely not centered on playing the game in terms of proving something out first and then working backwards. It does mean that BIPOC-led and centered have to be, one, strategic in when they fund. And so what I often tell clients is not every funder is for everything, particularly in Texas, particularly in Houston. And so what we often look at is we look at the lifeline or the life cycle of the work that they're going to be doing. And we say, all right, we know that this part of the work, particularly the beginning, is going to require more experimentation. It's going to be messy. It's going to be uncertain. It's going to be, you may not have the result that you're hoping for. So we need to resource this in ways that allow for that and be finding strategic funders who support that, because there are some who understand that and support that. And then we understand maybe there are these aspects of the work, books, libraries, infrastructure, that are a little bit more certain, a little bit more safe, a little bit more comfortable for folks that they'll feel comfortable funding. And so maybe we have them fund that. So that's one way to is to be strategic, using strategy just in how you resource and think about who is resourcing. But I will admit that this is not intended to play by those rules necessarily. It means that you have to be discerning in who makes sense for what when you're developing out your strategy and what strategies you have resourced by whom. Does that make sense? Oh, you're back on mute.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much for addressing
No
that.
problem. And again, I'm happy to talk. I don't want to get Fresh Arts in trouble. I'm happy to talk offline more about this because it is something that we all encounter.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate this.
So in terms of our time together, what I did is I developed a vision and a mission. What I did want to bring up also, Tazeen made me think of this, is that oftentimes I create visions and missions just for initiatives and projects. So an organization may have its own vision and mission, but even for or in a collaborative, they may have their mission and vision, but there may be a very strategic project that needs its own mission and vision as well. So this applies in fractals too, right? It can be at the group level, but it can also be based on the things that you're doing. The vision here is in a neighborhood, there's a small collective pocket of artists, artisans, collective worker or cultural workers and culture bearers who work in studios and workshops open to the public at large. At any point in the day, every day, the spaces are self-activated and resourced by community members teaching classes, developing group exhibitions, and providing programming. Despite the time of day, you'll encounter people in the space across all ages with special opportunities for community elders to share methods and knowledge that's disappearing from mainstream focus. And more than workshop alone, these spaces serve as spaces to gather and assemble, to organize and care for one another. So this is the vision. And we could say the mission is we work alongside community leaders to create community-rooted and driven creativity spaces that return to arts and culture as collective, accessible building practices, using education gatherings and resources. So you could say that's the mission. I came up with these off the fly, by the way. This is just me thinking. What I wanted to do is I wanted to have a vision and a mission for you all to read, and then spend about 3 minutes coming up with 3 or 4 strategies that you see from this mission and vision. I don't want to pull up music on my computer, so I'm going to play it on my phone and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. But yeah, spend about 3 to 4 minutes, no, 3 minutes with the time, coming up with 3 or 4 strategies that can be informed by the mission and vision that I have here. And then feel free, if you like, to place maybe 1 or 2 of your ideas in the chat in terms of strategies you develop. So for those who are interested, for those who would say, no, I am tired, I just want to sit and watch, got it. But for those who would like to practice this, go ahead and come up with 3 or 4 strategies based on that. Let's see, hold up. Oh, I see we have a Houstonian that was on. Let me.
Erin, we also have a question in the Q&A, maybe after this exercise, or you just tell me when you're ready to address another question.
Yeah, I see, Manisha, your question. Oh, chat is disabled. Good to know.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm gonna
please submit your questions there.
I'm gonna check out the chat thing.
No, not a problem.
Sorry about
Manisha,
that.
let me give it 2 more minutes and see if anyone has strategies. And then I want to spend the rest of the time answering questions. So yours would be the first question that we talk about, because that's a great question. And it's something everyone encounters. Let's give it maybe 1 more minute. Pulling out 3 or 4 strategies that can inform goals. Oh, I already see some great strategies. We'll give it a couple more, 30 more seconds. Okay, I see some great strategies. Hey, participation makes me happy. All right, so I asked 3 or 4 strategies that you could pull from this mission and vision. We have some great ones here. So develop a library of resources and materials accessible to the public. I love a library of things. Shareable also has a learning community that just developed around that, by the way, for anyone that's interested in that. Host a recruitment rally to obtain community elders who are willing to share their knowledge with clients. Absolutely. Develop a library of resources, accessible to the public. Traditional food fair and contest. Create symbiotic relationships with venues for programs. I love the word symbiotic. Cross-generational collaboration. Yes, yes, yes. Market one's collection of resources with the use of community influencers. I love that. I love that. Community members as part of the board. Absolutely. Build collaborations through community events with community artists and access their networks. These are phenomenal strategies. So you see, and what ends up happening is, because the strategies were pulled directly from the vision and mission, the idea of building collaborations through community events with community artists, that leads to this world, right? There's a direct dot connection. The cross-generational collaboration leads to this world, right? And so hopefully it makes a little bit more sense why I suggested with the framework, whether it's your organization or your group or the initiative itself, starting from a vision and getting into a mission so that you can create these amazing strategies that are dot connected to that mission and vision. And then I was going to have us spend some time pulling out goals. I think goals are pretty easy for folks. We tend to focus purely on goals anyway. So unless someone screams for us to focus on goals, I think we can go ahead and go to the Q&A. Put it in a chat if you're a goal person and you're like, nope, this needs to happen. And we can always go back. Otherwise, yeah, I went the wrong way. I will move on. So I did want to spend some time answering, Manisha, your question while everyone is on, and then we'll have some time to answer questions at the end as well. The question is, do you have suggestions or exercises that would help narrow a vision that is too broad? It's easy to sometimes get excited or carried away with a vision, and it becomes so expansive that you might be losing focus on the mission. Any tools that you can suggest that help affirm that you are on track? Hope this makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. What I would say, and I'm happy again to talk about this, Manisha, typically, it's not the vision that I find is too broad, because think about it. We're thinking about what is the world that we want to build toward. And so having a really expansive and broad understanding of how that looks can be incredibly helpful. It's whether we are visceral about that, right? Can we get explicit and start to talk about specifically what exists, what doesn't exist, what's shifted, what's changed? Now, what can happen is in developing this vision, our mission can definitely be too broad. That can go into, again, we want to end world hunger. And so if that's the case, what I usually suggest for folks is, one, let me try, there's a couple of things that I suggest for folks if it's too broad. One is, with your vision specifically, think about, is it really too broad or is it audacious and bold? Because sometimes I see people conflate the two when it comes to their vision, is they say, oh, this is too much. And it's like, well, is it really? We kind of don't necessarily want to stay where we've been. So see, is it too broad? Is it too much? Is it that you're leaning into and you're practicing that expansiveness, and that can feel really uncomfortable and it can feel really uncertain, but that's kind of the point because it's worlds we've never lived in before. And if you're developing a mission that's starting to feel too broad, that why, how, what can be super, super helpful. Because and I usually tell people, do a why plus how plus what statement built off of your vision. And then start to refine that into something that maybe is a little bit more succinct. And usually that gets people in a much more directed space to where they're not talking about 8 different things in their mission, and they're not saying something like we end hunger, but envisioning a world where each of us is nourished, we collaboratively and collectively feed the spirits, the souls, and the stomachs of our communities through culinary classes, education, and food gatherings, just kind of thing. And so at that point, then it starts to winnow it down, because we go from why they're doing it, that vision that they have in terms of we see a world where everyone is enriched and is nourished, to how they're doing it collaboratively and they're doing it collectively. But we do get to, and we're doing it through gatherings, we're doing it through culinary events, we're doing it through education. Manisha, hopefully that was helpful. I know that was really quick. And feel free to type if it isn't, if you can't necessarily come off of mute. Oh, okay, no problem. I know that we're at about 5 minutes left. Did want to go through some quick reminders. I'm providing the rice, you put your spices on it, right? So I'm just giving you my perspective based on my lived experience with the folks that I've worked with, but I do not and rebuke the idea of being an expert. I have expertise around certain things. You all are the experts of your work and your communities and how you do that work and with your communities. So take what works, leave the rest. And definitely please acculturate, co-opt, and reframe using your own lived experience, your culture, your history, your knowledge, and your lineage. So don't necessarily just take what I've said and implement that thinking that that's how it has to be. Make it your own and make sure it's reflective of you and of your communities. That in and of itself is a strategy. And again, you all are the experts, so please act accordingly. BANF. I did want to share a couple of slides in terms of BANF. Here is its vision in terms of the work that it does, and you'll actually get the slides, so you'll be able to see this in a little bit more detail. The accelerator, I wanted to share that opportunity for those organizations that are eligible and interested in applying. The application is due soon. So here is what comes with that opportunity. It's a $20,000 one-time grant to support planning and project expenses. There's a creative risk fund that supports bold, there goes that word, and adaptive experimentation. There's monthly peer network gatherings and learning cohorts and learning experiences for you all that participate. And there's evaluation and learning that helps connect the dot between the work that you do as part of this accelerator and work that's being done across the network, including with cultural treasures. And I'm working with individual artists that Candace DeMeza is working with, the communities that Fresh Arts works with, and et cetera. So if you are eligible, please check out the link that was just dropped into the chat around the workshops and getting a little bit more information about that. Here are some key dates. I'm glad I put this in here because I didn't want to mess that up. So May 28th is when that application is due. As I may or may not have mentioned, now that I think about it, the application does ask about strategies and goals. So if you've gone through this and you've paid some semblance of attention, it will be hopefully very helpful for you in terms of being able to submit your answers to those questions. I'm also, thank you so much, Mecca is hosting a town hall meeting where they'll be sharing more detail as well for those who are familiar with, should be familiar with Mecca. If you're not, please familiarize yourself. So check them out and stay connected with Fresh Arts. That's it for me. I'll be hanging back just a few minutes, but thank you so much again for your time. And thank you, Fresh Arts, for providing the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was a great workshop. I really enjoyed it. I put this info in the chat, but I just wanted to reiterate that you all will get an email, hopefully tomorrow, with all the links that I shared here, links to the document that Erin was referring to, and also a link to the recording of the webinar. And so please keep in touch with Fresh Arts, with BANF, and thank you so much for attending and for putting the arts into our community, which is so vital. We really appreciate all that you do.